Chapter 3 Thailand. If there was one thing Dazai was grateful for, it was the aircon on the overnight bus. Being out in the Malaysian heat was bad enough, but without the airflow, and with 30 or so other people in an enclosed space, well, Dazai would be lucky if he didn't boil. But unfortunately for him, life had been on his side for once. His butt already felt kind of numb from being sat on the bus since yesterday afternoon. He would take what little niceties he could get. He had watched the sunset and the shadows of the night pass by outside the window. The night seemed to last forever, but at the same time seemed to pass in a blur of monotony and quickly passing landscapes. He had seen it all. He hadn't had the pleasure of falling asleep, unlike Chuuya. It was strange. Dazai had always had an aversion to touch. He couldn't pinpoint why he didn't like it. It just always felt itchy, strange, gross, in a way he couldn't quite describe that made him want to throw himself as far away from the offending person as possible. But here was Chuuya, curled up against his side, completely unconscious, and Dazai didn't feel the need to shake him awake and make him move. It just felt natural to have Chuuya warm and close. No, it didn't feel natural, it felt right. Dazai hadn't dared move an inch in the last 7 hours, too afraid of waking up Chuuya. He had laid a blanket, grabbed in the frantic rush to pack in Yokohama, over Chuuya to ward off any chills the aircon may cause, but other than that, he had carefully arranged himself to be as comfortable as possible. He figured that if Chuuya had been so adamant on caring for him on those first few days in Singapore, then he should return the favor, even if it was just in a small way. That's why he had taken such care. Although Dazai was slightly disappointed to see that Chuuya hadn't disposed of his ugly hat, he had simply hidden it away in his bag. The monstrosity that Dazai was so sure he had seen the last of was over Chuuya's face, blocking out the light and acting like a deformed sleep mask. It looked incredibly out of place on a bus packed full of half-asleep backpackers. The sun had risen a while ago, but Chuuya didn't stir, even when the bus came to a slow stop. Dazai nudged Chuuya a little, and when the man still didn't move, he snatched that awful hat off his face. Chuuya looked up at Dazai blearily. Dazai grinned. "Look, Chuuya, cows!" he exclaimed, pointing out of the window. Chuuya squinted at him. "I swear to God, if that's what you're woken me up to tell me, I'll murder you." Dazai laughed. "Sounds delightful. Ideally after we gotten off the bus. I don't want to scare the poor passengers like that." "You're insufferable," Chuuya grumbled, snatching his hat out of Dazai's hand and placing it back over his face. "Also, we've arrived," Dazai added. Chuuya sprang up, looking around the bus with wide eyes. He finally catalogued the other people moving to get up and turned to Dazai, enraged. "Fucking start with that next time!" Dazai chuckled as Chuuya hurried to pack his things away. He stuffed the blanket haphazardly in his bag and just left his fancy hat on his head. He certainly looked a sight. Cargo shorts and a tank top topped off with an outrageously pretentious and expensive headpiece. Chuuya hadn't bothered to get rid of his choker either, giving the impression that half of him was a traveler and the other half was still an executive. They climbed out of the bus and took their first step onto Thai soil. Dazai supposed this should be a big moment, but in reality, he was just hit by how hot it was outside of the nicely air-conditioned bus. Dazed, he looked around the small town, then back at Chuuya. Chuuya looked more disoriented than anything. Clearly, neither of them knew what to do now. Shrugging, Dazai picked a random road and started walking. It's not like they had a destination anyway. They could probably just walk and walk forever, not having to worry about a thing. What an idyllic life that would be, just the two of them, forever exploring the wilderness. Unrealistic, maybe. Dazai didn't want to be stuck with a diet of berries and hunting birds his whole life, but theoretically fun. He and Chuuya walked in comfortable silence along the empty road. The landscape was the same as what Dazai had been gazing at for the past 12 hours, but up close it looked so much different. Outside of the bus, the hedges didn't pass in a blur, and every pothole seemed to tell its own story. Eventually, the winding path ran out, fading into the sand. Undeterred, Dazai climbed on a mound of sand. He gasped, gazing out at the scene that was laid out before him. The sea was sparkling, cerulean blue that spread out over perfect white sandy beaches. Even from this far away, Dazai could see the movement of colorful fish beneath the waves. He stood staring, entranced. Maybe this is what Odasaku meant when he talked about the beauty of the world, Dazai thought, still captured by the picturesque view. And if he never saw this, I'll appreciate it enough for the both of us. Chuuya joined Dazai on the mound of sand, equally as taken by the view. Risking a glance at his distracted face, Dazai quickly dropped his backpack on the ground and kicked off his shoes. He began the mad dash towards the sea, the sand scorching but soft on the bottom of his feet. He felt like he could never get tired of running like this. He was light, and he was free, and was part of this beautiful, enchanting scene. Delighted, he let out a laugh. He didn't even think to stop when he heard a yell from Chuuya. He crashed into the warm sea, finding it pleasantly cool on his sweaty, overheated skin. It was lovely. Splashing, he waded out a bit further, letting the tropical fish investigate his legs and the seaweed tickle his ankles. Diving in head first, he let the warm water consume him. For a few moments, there was nothing but a blissful warmth in the serene silence of being completely underwater. Drowning would be a good way to go, he thought to himself idly. Dying surrounded by a peace like this would be beautiful. Today, however, he still had things to do and places to explore. He kicked up off the sandy seafloor, quickly finding the surface and treading water. The beach looked even better from this angle, and the sea looked impossibly bigger. "You fucking idiot!" Chuuya yelled from the shore, trousers rolled up and his ankles in the water. "You've still got on all your clothes. Your bandages are gonna get soggy." Dazai laughed. So what? So what if he was wet? Nothing could get in the way of him in this. It was just all okay. Here, it was all okay. "They needed to wash anyway," he called back to Chuuya. "Wait, have you not washed those clothes since we set off?" "Come and join me, Chuuya." Dazai swam over to Chuuya, laying in the shallows and letting the gentle waves lap at him. "I feel a little like a mermaid swimming around while you call out for me on the shore." Chuuya looked at him, pulling a disgusted face to disguise the blush on his cheeks. Dazai took note. This was something he could have a lot of fun with. "I'm not a cretin like certain idiots, and I haven't got my swim trunks on." "My prince is leaving me over his clothes? How will I ever survive?" Dazai teased. "You've got more in your backpack. It's just so lovely and warm." Chuuya sighed. "Fine, but just this once." Dazai cheered, paddling back into the sea and waiting for Chuuya to join him. Chuuya pulled his top off and wow. Dazai felt his brain stop and start. Chuuya was fucking built. Dazai was objectively aware that Chuuya was strong, but knowing something and seeing it were two completely different things. He didn't draw his eyes away, as if seeing Chuuya's well-defined biceps all the time wasn't distracting enough. Dazai quickly put them on the mental list of things he would gladly lick, along with ice lollies and an electric fence. God, he could get used to this. Chuuya swam out to him, and Dazai shoved all those thoughts back, restraining himself from reaching out and seeing if Chuuya's muscles were just as solid as they looked. "This is my favorite place yet," Chuuya declared. There was a wide smile on his face, and despite the scenery all around them, Dazai couldn't draw his eyes away from the crinkle of his eyes and the gentle curve of his smile. "Is it worth the wet shorts?" Dazai teased. Chuuya responded by splashing his face, salty water nearly getting in his mouth. Dazai gasped. "Betrayal! You could have drowned me!" Chuuya rolled his eyes, swimming over to balance on a rock instead of treading water. Dazai easily followed. For a moment, they let the fish swim around their ankles, admiring them even if the waves distorted them. "Look, Chuuya!" Dazai pointed at a fish. "That one looks like you. It's orange and it has fancy fins, not to mention it's a bit small." Chuuya tackled him off the rock and into the open sea. Dazai laughed between breaths, quickly swimming away from the raging Chuuya. If only moments could go on forever, he would happily make this his eternal home on this beach, in the sea, with Chuuya. But eventually, the day did come to an end. After they climbed out of the sea, they dried themselves in the hot sun and got sand everywhere. It was warm and happy, and the Mafia felt like it was a completely different life. Dazai tried to take it all in, vowing to never forget any of it. There was a local fisherman who spotted them making their way into town with the sun still setting, and tinging the sky in coral pink. With the use of 3 different languages all mixed together clunkily, he managed to get across that he had a spare hut by the sea, and Dazai and Chuuya were welcome to spend the night. Dazai and Chuuya happily agreed, blindly following the man through the small, close-by town. Most people would have been more careful when a stranger asked them if they wanted a room for the night, but most people weren't Dazai and Chuuya. Trust was irrelevant. If something happened, they would be the ones walking away. Besides, the aging man seemed genuine enough. They walked past children playing outside, the air finally cooled enough to not sweat buckets, but the day's heat still lingering. There were smiles on their faces, food in their mouths, and Dazai envied them, in a way. They were so happy that they didn't even realize they were happy at all. Sadness was sparing and far in between. Happiness was simply their natural state. Dazai wouldn't have it any other way. He wondered if he was like that once. If he was, he didn't remember it. He wished he could feel the endless freeing happiness of those children. He wished he was so happy he didn't know what happiness was. The hut was located on the edge of the town, bordering the beach. Dazai didn't particularly mind the sound of bugs in the night air. There was something about the sound of bugs that made things feel homely. He even felt a rush of affection at the sight of moths crowding the porch light. Dazai had always had a soft spot for moths. They had never been pests to him as they had everyone else. Their fuzzy bodies looked soft, and their intricately patterned wings were enchanting. Moths would crowd the lights on warmer summer days in Yokohama, a sure sign that the summer was well underway. Moths came with the happiness of heated days, and even in the Mafia, catching the sight of a moth in his apartment never failed to cheer Dazai up a little. They were simple creatures, with only one goal, and Dazai respected their single-minded determination. Chuuya wrinkled up his nose, clearly not sharing Dazai's fondness for moths. He didn't understand how someone could hate the fuzzy little creatures, but he also knew he wasn't quite right, so maybe he would never understand. However, the moths were clearly a good sign, as the inside of the hut was small but clean. There was a toilet and a shower tucked away, a basic kitchen and 2 small hammocks strung across the space. Compared to the bus they spent the night on, it was paradise. Dazai and Chuuya thanked the man shakily in Thai, and he left them both in the hut, with the sun a mere golden glimmer on the horizon. The glassless windows and the wooden walls of the hut offered no insulation, but there was no need for it. The Thai night was hot enough, finally a truly comfortable temperature. Dazai let Chuuya go in the shower first, as he always did. He fished the food retrieved from a corner store out of the bag that had gotten lost among the backpacks, unpacking it and preparing all the vegetables. Chuuya got out of the shower, easily taking over from Dazai to do the actual cooking part, and Dazai washed after carefully peeling the salty bandages from his skin. Despite the new place, the routine made everything feel familiar. Fresh and clean, Dazai ate dinner with Chuuya, exchanging meaningless words that Dazai would forget in an hour. Usually, if Dazai spent so much time around just one person, he got bored or tired or even overwhelmed. He supposed it was just one of the human things he wasn't quite acquainted with, like nearly everything else in his life seemed to be. He didn't know. What he understood even less was how his tendency of getting rid of people after a certain length of time never seemed to apply to Chuuya. Chuuya had always broken the rules and defied the expectations for as long as Dazai could remember, so why should this be any different? Despite the days, and days on end, Dazai was glued to Chuuya's side, sharing rooms, sitting next to each other on the bus, barely leaving each other while exploring. He never got bored or tired, and certainly never overwhelmed. Chuuya's presence didn't grate on him like so many others did. Chuuya was like a warm blanket, comfortable and safe. Chuuya was sometimes a complete mystery to him, but a mystery he would gladly keep around. Once dinner was eaten, one of Chuuya's favorites that Dazai had been mindful of getting all the ingredients for, they retired to the hammocks strung up from the ceiling. The sea breeze wafted through the windows, and Dazai fell asleep to the sound of waves crashing against the shore and the gentle rocking of the hammock. The days and weeks passed by timelessly. Dazai didn't know how many days had gone since they arrived, and he didn't care either. They had all the time in the world. 2 years needed to pass before they returned to Yokohama, and Dazai and Chuuya's little trip to Southeast Asia had barely taken up any of that time. Why should Dazai care about how many days they spent on the road with Thailand's countryside, passing by the outside window? What did it matter if they spent 5 days relaxing at a beach? They had all the time in the world. Traveling was thrilling, but entirely different from the thrill of the Port Mafia. In the Port Mafia, Dazai had meticulously planned and schemed and lived to see his plans pan out exactly as he predicted. The Port Mafia was thrilling because of the constant danger of death. Would a seemingly loyal subordinate stab you on the back? Would an enemy organization finally get the better of him? Would someone actually manage to kill him? Dazai had been trying for years. The thought of dying was just as thrilling as the thought of avoiding it. There was no threat of betrayal or plan going awry in Thailand. Dazai had no operations to dictate, nor danger of death, aside from the usual biggest threat on his life, himself. No one to betray him other than Chuuya, and Dazai was pretty certain that Chuuya wasn't going to betray him. Because if Chuuya had put up with him in Singapore, he could put up with him now. Besides, if either one of them betrayed the other, they would both find themselves in the same predicament, alone. Traveling was thrilling because no matter how hard he tried to guess, Dazai could never predict where they would end up at the end of the day. Would they be helping a local fisherman haul his big catch in exchange for some quite frankly delightful fresh red snapper fish? Would they be getting wasted in a hole-in-the-wall bar they stumbled across, ending in Dazai having to piggyback a drunk Chuuya to the closest hotel? Would a local kindly offer them a room for the night? Dazai never knew, and that was the thrill of it. On one notable occasion, they got dragged into a late-night snorkeling expedition with a group of over-enthusiastic Venezuelans looking for a shipwreck. Truth be told, his time in the Mafia seemed like a whole different lifetime. Dazai had shoved any thoughts of the Black Lizard and Mori and Double Black into the very back of his mind. He didn't want to think of those things, or what they would do when they eventually had to return to Yokohama. Even the slightest thought about afterwards made his body feel crushed beneath a weight of all the sudden, all-consuming dread. So, he made it a problem for future Dazai. He made it a problem for a Dazai that was feeling organized and brave enough to figure it out, or a Dazai that lived 2 years in the future and had no choice but to stop ignoring his problems. But for now, it was future Dazai's problem. He tampered down the waves of dread by repeating that sentiment to himself, before going over to bother Chuuya for the millionth time that day. Even though the days were warm and filled with a complete disconnect from Dazai's life before, there were still times he sat down, finally took a break from the endless movement and the new experiences, and realized that no matter what, there would always be something missing. Dazai would feel an ache in his chest, an emptiness that could never be filled, and he just wished so many times that he could just be okay for once. On the better nights, it was a vague off feeling, so common and regular that Dazai barely noticed it anymore. There were bad nights, where Dazai would tear at his skin, because the urge to stab and slice and hurt was just too great to resist. And then there were the middle nights, the ones that happened the most often, where Dazai would lay around, wanting. He didn't know what he wanted. He didn't know why he wanted it, but there was something inside him that was missing, a chunk of his soul torn out. Maybe it was his whole soul that was missing. That wouldn't surprise him. He would sit, motionless, trying to figure out what it was he wanted. Food, warmth, a walk, TV, his book. But every time he thought, he came to a conclusion, and thought he found something that would satisfy the longing for even just a while. He was only disappointed. The longing never left, coursing through his veins like a poison. He felt hollowed out and empty, longing and longing and longing for something that had never existed and never would. Some nights he let the longing consume him, staring out into nothingness for hours. Others he tried to put it to the back of his mind, ignore it as one would a particularly annoying bruise, and go to sleep. No matter what he did, at the end of the day the emptiness was always there. It had been his constant companion for as long as he could remember, but at least it felt correct for once. Now, in the hot Thai climate, with the waves as the background music and no Port Mafia, the missing felt out of place. He was supposed to be having a good time, yet here he was, still wanting more. How ungrateful was he? How could this not be enough for him? Any other person would be over the moon, ecstatic, happy. Why couldn't he just let it go for fucking once? Why couldn't he part with it, just for a little while? Why wasn't he letting himself be happy, when so much was going right and there were long hours where nothing seemed to bother him? Why couldn't he just let himself be okay? He enjoyed traveling more than he ever enjoyed anything in his life. As much as he had never expected to be happy, there was still something inside him that told him he had failed for feeling miserable despite it all. Was it really so hard? Not even to necessarily be happy for 2 days, But to just not feel this overwhelming sense of missing? Maybe it showed how inhuman he really was. Not even this could make him feel like he should. He didn't understand. Why couldn't he just be like everyone else? Why was he cursed to be so empty and nothing could fill the hole in his chest? But life went on. No matter how much Dazai lingered on his ability to simply feel correct, to feel human in some shape or form, time still passed. The sun still rose on those long empty nights, and the days would still come, regardless of whether Dazai felt whole. Chuuya would wake up, make breakfast, and Dazai would see no reason to stay immobile on his chair. Even if he had to drag himself, he made sure he was out of the door by noon, ready to distance himself from the night's pondering and face the unknown adventures outside his door. Who knew where they would end up? Today brought Chuuya and Dazai to a market filled with white, sheeted stalls, bursting to the brim with goods. In the maze of tables and sellers, Dazai found himself quite positively lost in a matter of minutes. The voices of many people crowded in, and the way he quickly lost sight of the way he came made the whole thing railingly disorienting. It felt like a proper adventure. What was an adventure without being a little lost? Even with Chuuya's glaring, they were both quickly distracted by the million different things for sale. Food, clothes, artwork, jewelry, knickknacks, things that were fakely genuine, and things that were genuinely fake. They sold just about everything under the sun. Dazai had to shepherd Chuuya away from the hat stall, where he was admiring a hat that was somehow even uglier than the one he already owned. Likewise, Dazai was a bit miffed when Chuuya cut off his order at the cart selling seafood. He had enjoyed it before, especially the crab, and Thailand only cemented his love, even if he did have to request that everything was not spicy. Although, in retrospect, Dazai would never have been able to eat all of it. They each picked up their share of trinkets. Dazai had never cared whether something was a genuine brand or not, and these watches may be fake, but they were all shiny. He laughed at Chuuya's disgusted face when he bought yet another fake one. Despite all his hesitancy, Dazai made sure Chuuya still had something to commemorate their time in Thailand, just for the novelty of it. They wandered from stall to stall. Dazai couldn't tell if they'd been here an hour or 3. All the time melted into one. The sun was yet to set, and it caught on Chuuya's features, highlighting his face with its golden rays. Dazai felt his heart skip a beat. How odd. He usually had perfect control over even his beating heart. Maybe he was finally going to have a heart attack. His eyes lingered on Chuuya, despite the alarming fluttering it caused in his chest. Shaking his head, he wandered over to a clothing stall, weaving between the crowd. Absent-minded, he ran his hands along the garments, pausing when he felt a particularly soft one. The material was light, too, perfect protection from the sun. "Hey, Slug!" Dazai called, and Chuuya looked over, glaring. Dazai held it up to his chest. It seemed like some sort of light, flowy thing you were supposed to throw over the top of your clothes. It was perfect. It was getting increasingly frustrating to cover himself in so many bandages every day, purely because long-sleeved shirts made him overheat. This way, he could be lazy and only cover his wrists and neck. He was going to buy this, whether Chuuya liked it or not. He desperately needed something to cover him that didn't insulate his skin like a greenhouse. "What do you think of this?" Chuuya wrinkled his nose. "It's too flowy, you'd look like a girl." "Please, Chibi's just jealous that I can wear this sort of thing without being mistaken for a girl." Dazai dodged out of the way of Chuuya's sharp jab to his arm. "Besides, look at it, it's such a pretty color," he said fondly, running his hand over the soft baby blue fabric. Chuuya rolled his eyes. "Sure, whatever, get it." Smiling victoriously, Dazai wandered over to haggle with the seller, with difficulty, as he still hadn't learned Thai, and walked away with his wallet slightly lighter, but a perfect new piece of clothing. And if Chuuya didn't like it, well, all the better. Their journey had taken them up the coast, zigzagging from one side of the thin country to the other. They let life lead them around, traveling with neither a destination nor a care in the world. They went along with the flow, and the flow seemed to have taken them to Bangkok. The noise was close to overwhelming, but Dazai for once didn't mind it. It was all part of Thailand, and even if the shouts of the population were a little too loud, then it was just part of the experience. Car horns filled the air like some kind of background melody to the endless sound, and he could hear the hum of electricity emitting from the clumps of wires. Probably a bit of a safety hazard, but that was probably just one of the city's charms. "Look, Slug!" Dazai yelled, pointing. Chuuya squinted, following Dazai's outstretched finger to the tattered sign. "What is it?" "It's his airport!" Dazai exclaimed. Upon seeing Chuuya's blank look, he sighed. He supposed he would have to elaborate. "Feel like adding another country to the list?" "You're just asking me out of the blue if I want to go to a new country?" "Yep," Dazai grinned. Dazai stayed still under Chuuya's scrutinizing gaze. At last, Chuuya must have found what he was looking for. Dazai couldn't imagine what it would be. "Sure, let's go." Dazai cheered, flagging down a Tuk Tuk, which Dazai had thought was part of the whole Bangkok experience, but soon found out it was the quickest way to discover what traveling sickness felt like. He would never allow Chuuya to complain about his driving again. Nevertheless, they miraculously made it to the airport in one piece, with nothing in their future except possibilities. I love this chapter. I like the beach scene, though that one kind of caught me off guard, not gonna lie. Dazai quickly put them on the mental list of things he would gladly lick.